5:30 p.m. And we are going to schedule a Building and Grounds Committee meeting the 9th of May at 5:30 p.m. The Building and Facilities meeting, or Budget and Finance, I'm sorry, Budget and Finance will be in the Administration Building, and the Building and Grounds will be here.
And we did have a meeting in Budget and Finance, so
yes.
Just a quick update on that. The administration is working through the budget and closed a very large gap in the initial budget, and so we're fine-tuning that, and we'll talk that further at our next meeting. So
correct.
I'm not going to say anything more at this point.
No, I think
where that is.
Yep, that's good.
I'd rather review that final proposal that will come to the board
yes.
before we go into those details.
Correct.
Okay.
I'd like to go back to the minutes that we approved. I've alluded to an item on page 18 of the committee meetings that were scheduled. The minutes say Building and Grounds Committee will meet on April 22nd at 4:30 in STEM Academy, and that should have been Budget and Finance Committee. Just to correct that for the record. That's my bad. Missing that until later. Okay, unfinished business. You have the school calendar.
So we've received a lot of feedback. I have forwarded you some letters that emails that I've gotten from parents. The staff and faculty have also expressed some concerns about the proposed calendar. And so, you know, I know you guys had asked to have further discussion on it. The majority of the feedback that I've been getting is that there's concern about starting the school year so early. That is a week where there are still some vacations of staff that are scheduled. That is a week where a lot of parents are taking freshmen to college. And so that may affect a number of our administrators and our teachers and our support staff. So that was the primary concern about starting so early. There has been also concern expressed to me about the week off preceding Easter, and some of the points that have been made about that, or concerns that have been expressed, is that if we take that week off and we come back on the 14th, which that leaves only 4 days before the beginning of the PSSA testing. And I think there's concerns about the kids getting back into a routine. I've also had it expressed to me that the week after Easter is typically a high absenteeism week, especially Easter Monday. So the suggestion has been to make the 6th and the 7th and the 8th as potential snow day makeups and lock in Easter Monday, that we would not mess with that. So those are the types of concerns that we've been getting. Shane had also given me a list of. Pardon me?
I think most of those you touched on.
I think the ones that the three of us got were pretty similar. So I submit that to you for discussion, for further discussion about the calendar. I want to make sure that that you're getting the feedback I'm getting.
So if we were to start later, what, 26th of August, that's the beginning of the last week? Mm-hmm. That's 2 student days. Where would those student days come from? Would they come at the end, or would we find them someplace else and put it in the calendar?
Well, that's up to you. You could have those student days on the 6th and the 7th preceding Easter. That's a Monday and Tuesday. And that would allow you to still finish on the 5th, I believe.
My concern is, and I know I've said this before with publicly, privately, when it ends up being just a game of, okay, so we call the 6th and 7th the student days, but now you've got only 2, possibly 3 snow days. You're going to have more than that, no matter how you look at it. Contact on the end, or you can have them, you know, you can put them on the 6th and 7th, but then if we have 5 or 6 snow days before that, that's going to push us out past the 5th as well. So I would prefer, you know, what I would like to see is the 26th start date, have the 6th, 7th, and 8th as snow makeup days, give back the 13th as a guaranteed day off is there any possibility through the use of Act 80 days or anything to keep graduation on the 5th?
There might be.
Well, if you're taking away or giving back the 22nd, 23rd of August to the community, then my question is why do we have to be off the 30th for a long Labor Day weekend when we're giving back people for vacation time?
There's one day.
The week before, so there's a day. And you look at November 27th, which is the Wednesday before Thanksgiving, that could be a day that we use for that as well. And still keep the 6th, 7th, 8th, and even the 9th of April as the 4 snow days. And I say Holy Thursday, but still giving the 13th, keeping the 13th off, and then the January 20th. So there'll be 5 built-in snow days, still keeping June 5th as the last day of school. And if we had to add snow days on, you can add them on the 8th and the 9th.
I mean, the 30th is the Friday of the fair. And there
That's
are
right.
activities going on with students at the fair.
That's right.
Yeah, that's 4-H show day.
I think that's like sometimes we're off, sometimes we're not, right? Is generally what we've done.
I'm just throwing it out there. It's
I agree.
you know, it's a point of discussion. We can't please everyone
No.
with every decision. I think we're starting early. I think ending closer to June 5th is really what the target should be, since we're starting so early. So wherever we can compress time off and keep the high education level, I think that's what I'd rather shoot for. Personally, I'd like to get January 2nd and 3rd off, but that's my own personal request, but this is more than what my wife tells me to say.
Greg?
I just had a quick question. Let's play devil's advocate here and say that there are no snow days, or there's just a couple, and you still have the 6th, 7th, and 8th off, and now you haven't addressed people's, you're kind of planning that you're definitely gonna use the 6th, 7th, and 8th anyway, that you're gonna have snow days, because if you don't have those snow days, then you're gonna have that week off, and then that, again, plays into the testing issue and everything. Just curious.
I think it's a certain fact that we'll have 5 snow days.
Yeah.
But I mean,
4
we
years
can still
ago,
take the time.
it was like 4 years ago, we had like 0 snow days the whole time.
I mean, it could happen, I'm just
So it's
curious.
possible.
Great point and a great devil's advocate question, but I believe that we're playing the odds. I think the later the snow days we can account for in April, I think we're gonna use them.
The odds would say yes.
And some of the arguments I'm hearing, or from what I'm hearing people talking to me, is the 6th, 7th, and 8th, they've also got to worry about childcare. They don't necessarily have those days off.
Yeah.
They didn't plan their vacations that time. They planned theirs for the summer.
I've heard that argument too. What I come back to is that idea of the kids are in school for 180 days, so it really doesn't make a difference if their 180 ends on June 5th or if it ends on June 12th and you have a week off in the beginning. There's not going to be any more or less days in the calendar year that they're going to have to find childcare. I mean, I was even trying to think of situations where having that week off would be a childcare dilemma, but I mean, the end of the day is people who have to find childcare have to find childcare for X number of days and out of 365, regardless of where they fall. But I think the things that have been suggested here all sound reasonable I think we're all kind of on the same page. You know, my preference is we keep them as snow days, and I would think we would want Heather to take this back and make sure what we're saying works as far as the days and the numbers and whatnot, and bring it back when it, you know.
I just need to make sure that I understand what you're directing me to do, because I mean, there's been a couple different ideas, so.
I don't think we know. I think there's a lot of people that
So let's
are,
talk
I mean,
about-
there's all the possibilities,
So what we do agree on, it sounds like, is the first student day would be August 26th.
Correct.
Yes.
That's what I'm hearing.
Yes.
I think it's,
Okay.
So the in-service days will be the 22nd and 23rd,
would make sense.
okay?
And then the 30th, when the fair is.
That's the 4-H
That's what
kids show
it's-
day.
yeah.
I think we should keep that.
Yes.
That show day.
decide what you wanna do with it, one way or the other, either keep it positively not a snow day, or just schedule it as a school day.
We still gotta find 2 days, right?
Yeah.
I think that day should be off, quite honestly. If you look at it, I'd be interested to know what attendance looks like on the Wednesday before, Thanksgiving.
It's a very difficult day.
I think it's a
It's
high travel
very,
day too,
very
if people
difficult day to
go
go.
away.
I think we just make sure that it's a snow day then.
Well, I have
I think
another,
snow days
Decide
the way to
up
go.
so the second, now, forgive me, I'm not a hunter, but I've been reading about, listen, Dr. Purple.
Jason, you're gonna defend.
No, but no, what I'm asking is that still going to be a big hunting day since whatever changed to move it back to
It
Saturday?
Absolutely.
It's a contractual.
Contract.
Okay,
Yes.
okay,
Contract.
I'm not a hunter, I thought
No,
it was
no, no.
worth
It's a
asking.
big
In my original draft of the budget, I played around with that day, but in the support staff contract, it says that they will have that day off. So if we were to have school, we would have no support staff.
And we would have no school.
Yeah.
Yeah, that could turn out.
So is that leaving the 27th as a snow day? Is that where we went? I'm trying to take notes, and I'm failing.
I would say either decide to have it off or decide to go to school and not designate it as snow day.
I personally would vote to have that day just off.
Okay, so it's no
But I
longer.
mean, we should hear from other people if people disagree, I mean.
I guess the question, you can flip a coin. I'd just like to keep, if we're starting earlier, I wanna keep the end of school earlier and keep it close to graduation. Because as we're seeing this year, we're down to the wire, that's all I'm
I
saying.
do agree with that,
And I think the
we're
June
starting
5th, we're starting that early, I'd love to keep it that June 5th, and how we manage those days in between. And I know we're not pleasing everybody, but what's the educational value of, and I understand kids are gonna miss on the 27th, but not everybody's gonna miss. Kids are gonna miss on the 2nd and the 3rd of January possibly, kids are gonna miss Easter, Wednesday. I just think we have to look at what's the best thing for the education and how we fit it in there to keep that last day of school the 5th.
So we make April 6th and 7th school days? Those are those 2 days.
But if you make them school days, we're probably going to have extra snow days that have to go at the end. I think we can't lose sight of that fact.
That's probably true.
Yeah.
Yeah, so the other, I don't know this is a good idea, but you could take those April 6th, 7th days and move them as snow makeup days on January 2nd and 3rd.
What was that, Bert?
The only problem with that is that
That's, yeah,
So-
John,
so here's
the
what's-
snow days in April, ideally, snow days in April are better than snow days in January.
Yeah, that's what, right, yeah.
January snow days.
Cause snow days will happen in end of January, we blew through those days.
It kinda seems like we typically find our big, in my memory anyway, it's Martin Luther King. You know, we don't go to school that week, generally speaking.
In January.
No, I'm saying like in January, the snow starts after that date you're talking about usually. Like in my memory, I feel like we've had, like Martin Luther King was supposed to be, well this year, it was supposed to be a snow makeup day and then it ended up being another snow day. And then there were a couple other ones that week. So having snow days before that just doesn't seem.
So there's no consensus on where we're getting the 2 days from, is there?
Well,
I guess
no.
my thought is take 6th and 7th and tack the rest of the snow days on at the end of the year.
And keep the snow days as the January 20th, April 8th, and April 9th? Keep
No,
those,
6th, 7th, and 8th, we said, right?
Well, no, they're talking
No.
now about making the 6th and
If
7th.
we're moving the
actual
day out,
days.
John,
Oh.
20th?
we gotta make up those 2 days.
But that, you're robbing Peter to pay Paul, unless we have a real mild winter.
But it is addressing the concerns of the teachers about PSSAs, it's helping to address some of those
And
concerns.
then we can split it.
and
We
the
did
concerns about the,
first two school days,
start
the second
moving
two
the start of school to the 26th as opposed to the 22nd. Cause I think there's the college freshman orientations and things like that.
We all agreed on that.
Okay. So what about John's discussion about the 27th? Do we just have school that day?
No, it's scheduled off, right? Or is it? No.
It's scheduled
No,
as
it's
a makeup day.
It's scheduled as a makeup day.
So it's off unless we make it
Off,
up.
yeah.
I would just say keep it off. Not have a snow day there. Cause
You can
Alright.
do that.
I can do that. April 27th is a half day. Then we get the day,
November
but
27th.
it also is accommodating to
November.
the families and it's accommodating to the faculty and the staff.
Okay, let's do that.
Okay? Alright. Alright, so that's November 27th,
Half a day.
half day.
So we still have to find another day.
Well,
No, that takes one.
That takes
That's
one,
one.
we need two, right?
and so here's my proposal. If you had school on the 6th of April,
That's your second day that you're found.
okay, alright, you do the 7th and the 8th as their,
Snow day.
Snow makeup days that we'll almost definitely use.
yes. 7th and the 8th become the snow makeup days, and the 6th becomes a student day.
So that gives us 3 makeup days built into the school year? Am I counting
It
that
gives
right?
us,
Are we
January
using-
20th,
The 9th?
it gives us the 7th and the 8th.
Yep, 3.
And what about the 9th? Are we gonna leave that as a lockdown day off?
It's up to you
Or
guys.
I think we could use that as a snow
I
day.
think that's
too.
a snow day as
Okay.
well.
And I think we should lock in Good Friday and Easter Monday that we aren't gonna take them away.
Okay,
That'll always be off,
okay.
so we can't change that.
The only
So
thing
if
I
people
will say
travel,
is-
they've got that.
I think I think if you make the 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th, 13th, it gets at this concern of if you wanna travel, you still have 5 days too. So, if we're gonna make the 6th, I would propose we leave the 7th and 8th as snow makeup days and lock in the 9th through the 13th. Cause then if you wanna travel, you can still travel. It's 5 days.
Okay. I don't know
Again, that's
how
one
everybody
person's.
versus, yeah.
I'm indifferent, I mean, it's the difference between having
Reasonable.
3 snow makeup days in the year or 4, and
That means that
I think we're gonna end up going at the end anyway, so.
Well, I think these are well positioned though.
Right, no, I agree.
I think we should use the Thursday.
So building
There shouldn't be anything after.
So chances are we're gonna have that week before Easter, we would most likely have school the 6th, 7th, and 8th. It would be, the 6th would be a regular student day, the 7th and the 8th would be makeup days. And I'm guessing we will need them. So I understand, Craig, what you're saying, like, but I think the odds are that we're still gonna get 3 days in that week.
Two's a better
Yeah.
bet, I think, but I'm just suggesting or just asking.
Yeah.
That was mentioned to me as well.
My experience has been since I've been here. We will need them and a couple more.
you could do that.
So that would have the last day still on the 5th.
I
Yeah,
can
you
do
got the
that,
2
but
days.
I'm willing to give that away. No, I think the
You got,
fourth,
you got the 2 days, the half a day for
I don't
Thanksgiving.
think it can't be the 4th, because we made up a day on the 27th, and we're making up a day on the 6th.
That's right.
So it's the
There's the 2.
So it'd still be the
It
5th,
would still be the 5th.
unless we have more than 3 snow days,
Right.
in which case,
Right. So we still may be able to get graduation on the 5th.
That's right, cause then if you pick up 2, like we did,
Yep.
count the hours and see what it looks like to keep graduation on the 5th.
So I will bring this back to you.
That's right.
I will bring this back to you in 2 weeks with those changes on it, okay? All right, thank you.
Nobody made any parties yet.
Right.
Okay, calendar done. Item 2, looking for a second reading of board policy 123.1 program.
Mr. President, if I may, I think there was some discussion on this the last time.
Yes.
And looking at this policy, I did not see, some of the suggested changes. So if I may, can, I ask,
Have it brought back?
consider tabling it?
Okay,
Okay.
you can table it. All right, new business. Basic account is there for your review. Item 2, looking for resolution to support Senate Bill 34 and House Bill 526 for other efforts to provide a fiscally common sense approach that will provide savings for school districts operating full-time online learning programs and are required to make tuition payments for their students to attend cyber charter schools.
So if I can just explain this, there are 2 bills, one in the House and one in the Senate right now. They're calling for cyber charter school reform. And they both have to do with payments to cyber charter school. So currently, if a student leaves buildings to maintain, we have heat to turn on, we have lights to turn on, we have class limits, and we have space limitations. And so all of the stuff that we maintain goes into what it costs us to educate a student. They don't have any lights to turn on, they don't have any buildings to maintain, they don't have any roofs to replace, okay? They have no security issues. And so what it costs them to educate a student is far less than what it costs us to educate a student. But the funding formula says they get every penny that it would cost us to educate a student. So currently, those numbers are around $10,000 for a regular ed student and about $35,000 for a special education student. The first bill that is being considered basically says that the formula would change. And so when the formula changes, what happens is that there would be a cost of how much it would actually, we would be billed based on how much it actually costs them to provide a cyber education. So that's one bill, okay, that's being considered. The second bill says that if a district were to have its own cyber program, that parents would need to use that cyber program, right? So we would keep the subsidy for that student. And if they chose to send their child to another cyber educational facility like Agora or PA Virtual Charter, then they would have to pay, the family would have to pay. So those are the two bills that are being considered right now in Harrisburg. Now, all of the districts in Pennsylvania are being encouraged to please pass resolutions in support of these two bills. And so that's what this is about tonight. I can tell you that on my computer every single day I get emails of districts that are passing these resolutions, because the amount of money that's being spent, it's flowing out of districts to cyber charter schools is just astronomical. So I ask for your support in passing these resolutions. We will send them on to Harrisburg, and I will make sure that all of our representatives get them.
Motion approved.
Second.
I think it's important to mention also, what are we spending, about $1 million a year? Is a ballpark?
I have to go back and look.
That was the last number I was aware of. I think last year I had asked and we had looked and it was about $1 million a year.
And I think that has gone up since
Right.
that last time. So,
Yes.
and we're tracking ahead of, more than what we had initially anticipated. So,
Right.
I
Those
think that this
numbers-
problem only gets bigger if there isn't something to control those costs.
I should clarify, the numbers that I used are numbers that we anticipate for next year. Those are the numbers we're using to budget right now, 10,000 and 35,000.
80 students at 10,000, 800,000.
Yeah.
And we have a number of students in special ed at 35,000.
Yeah.
So you probably
Yeah.
$1 million probably children.
So,
Okay.
I don't know
More like
if they're gonna
1.5.
pass, but I think we should show our support for them.
Any more discussion? Roll call.
Dr. Carbola?
Yes.
Mr. Swilly?
Yes.
Mr. Burke?
Yes.
Mrs. Arnold?
Yes.
Mrs. Bennett?
Yes.
Mrs. Gregory?
Yes.
Mr. Widener?
Yes.
Mr. Farr?
Yes. Item 3, looking for resolution to approve budget transfers as listed for the STEM and high school.
Motion to approve.
Second.
Discussion. Roll call.
Dr. Carbola?
Yes.
Mr. Swilly?
Yes.
Mr. Burke?
Yes.
Mrs. Arnold?
Yes.
Mrs. Bennett?
Yes.
Mrs. Gregory?
Yes.
Mr. Widener?
Yes.
Mr. Farr?
Yes. Item 4, discussion on installation of air conditioning units in the Intermediate Center.
So, we are making progress in our journey to install air conditioning in the intermediate center. So
We have
as
the units already, correct?
we have the units already. So for those of you who may not remember, about a year ago we purchased the actual split units, and at that time did not have sufficient funding to move forward with the installation. So over the past several months, John Chapolsky has been looking at various options for installation. We got estimates from 3 different providers. One of those did not use prevailing wage, so that while they came in lower, they would have to use prevailing wage if we put this out to bid. The two that we got that were very comparable to one another, on the surface were both co-stars. When we asked for all the co-stars supporting data, one of them did not provide all the supplemental data that's required to prove that they have co-stars to approval to do that specific task. So while they may be co-stars, they aren't necessarily co-stars approved to do AC installation. So we currently have a proposal from Bogomil Incorporated. They're a heating and ventilation company out of Pittston. They are co-stars. They've provided the right information. The co-stars discount that they would pass along would be approximately $8,000 because that's part of the state contract. This number includes the roofing work, so we asked them to go back and work with Dunmore Roofing to incorporate that into this bid so that it wasn't separate. This also includes all the electrical. So the installation costs to finish the intermediate center, and when I say finish, this is for the 3 remaining grade wings that do not currently have air conditioning. So several years ago there was a project to install these same split units in what used to be the 8th grade wing, which is now the 6th grade wing of the intermediate center. This estimate would allow us to go do the same procedure basically in 3rd, 4th, and 5th. And so the other good news is as we've talked with them, they believe that they can begin this installation, assuming this passes your approval, relatively quickly. So I think that it's very conceivable that we could see this begin within the next month. They believe they also can do this work while kids are in building. So we did this before, so when the units were previously installed, kids were in the building. These companies are very accustomed to working around, you know, they would do work in hospitals and schools, so they have mobile units, and we would probably have to relocate a class or 2 at a time. I've already spoken with Mr. Azarovich about that, and he thinks that's very doable. So the current job cost after the co-stars discount is $74,000, and I would like your approval to begin moving forward with that installation.
So we'll be ready to go for, like, when we need it here.
Yeah, I mean, like, you know, if you go have an 80-degree day, 85-degree day in the next 2 weeks, I'm not promising you that, but I do think that certainly, like, you know, within, you know, the next 8 weeks, I think we can get them certainly by fall, no question. I mean, our plan would be to start this like within the next couple of weeks. They indicated to John that they felt like they could mobilize within a couple of weeks. It'll probably take us, you know, about a month to go through this process. The installations on the in the 3rd grade wing require wall penetration, which is different than what we've done previously. So while I don't think that's complicated, it is just different. And so I don't have a good estimate to understand what that timeline would look like for that portion of it. But I would anticipate that we would start with what is currently 5th grade. So if you look at the heat profile in the building, what is currently 5th grade is the hottest area in the building. It's 2nd floor, it's along the front of the building. Like where Nolan Robinson's classroom is where it spikes, is the highest. So we would start with that wing, then we would do 4th grade, and then we would go downstairs.
That's great, because hopefully it gets a lot of it by June 1st.
I'm hoping.
Awesome.
Yes.
And I think too, it will make a difference just having that 2nd floor cooled.
Yeah, I agree.
You know, just having the whole 2nd floor cooled will make a difference as we move into the 3rd grade area.
So it's basically, this does the classrooms, doesn't do the auditorium, doesn't do the gym.
Right, it's just classrooms.
Right, it's just the classrooms.
Most of the time.
Do you need a motion?
I think we do need a motion, even though it's co-star. I mean, if you don't think we do,
We need a motion.
I think
you think we do?
Let's
I mean,
just-
it's really your
Motion to move
discretion.
forward on installing the rest of the AC units in
Second.
the intermediate center.
Motion second, discussion.
Where does the money come from? What, did you have it set aside already?
So what we did was we moved 2 projects. So there is money in this year's budget to cover this. There was originally in this year's budget a plan to do an air handling unit in the auditorium at the old, what is currently the administration building.
The gymnasium.
The gymnasium. What did I say? I'm sorry.
Auditorium. It's okay.
Gymnasium. Thank you. In the administration building. And what we'll do is move that to next year's budget. That frees up money, and there was also money for the purchase of some equipment, and that came in below what was originally budgeted. So the combination of those 2 things will allow us to do that installation this year.
That's great.
more discussion? Roll call.
Mr. Swilly?
Yes.
Mr. Burke?
Yes.
Mrs. Arnold?
Yes.
Mrs. Bennett?
Yes.
Mrs. Gregory?
Yes.
Dr. Frevola?
Yes.
Mr. Wagner?
Yes.
Mr. Clark?
Yes.
Thank you.
They're already celebrating.
I Okay, item 5, discussion on future plans for the former Evans Falls, those 3 elementary buildings.
Okay, a while ago, we had a committee meeting that had some discussion on this thing. And the committee at that time had a recommendation of the sale of both. Now, there was no timeline set that I know of, but there was a sale of both, but we had a phone call from some citizens after, and I'd like to keep that in consideration if possible. About some land at Evans Falls.
And I think there was some discussion of maybe some of the lines that was seen bid initially, at least.
I don't know how we wanna handle it, just advertise it through a realtor or.
Well, I think we're like, we've had it, just so, I don't know if we've mentioned it at other meetings, we've had them appraised. We've done some research on what this could potentially look like. And so the next step, my understanding would be is to have a building and grounds committee meeting and like really just firm up the plan as far as like, okay, this is the next step we're gonna take, we're gonna do it on this timeline, you know, boom, boom, boom.
How we're gonna do it,
It doesn't have to be determined. I just feel like it's very important that the board is transparent with the community that this is your plan. Your plan is to sell both buildings, and that is your desire, is to sell both buildings. Exactly how we do it and the timeline we follow, I think can be determined by the committee.
should we have a motion to have the committee, proceed, along those lines?
I'm assuming that's what will happen on the 9th of next month, we'll be
Yeah.
putting us.
Yes, I would agree.
Yes.
I think the other thing worth mentioning is that, and somebody correct me if I'm saying this wrong, please, but in doing some research about allowing leasing of buildings for different projects and things like that, there's a very strict guideline as to what that program can be, or the school can become liable for paying taxes on the buildings, even though am I saying that properly?
Yes.
Yeah, that is basically true. So if we were to have somebody in the building, so first off, if the building continues to remain vacant and it remains within our ownership, we will be expected to begin paying taxes. So, I mean, that's number one.
So that's gonna happen regardless.
And that will probably be in 2020, okay? So where specifically in 2020, you know, that remains to be seen, but that is my understanding. Second, if we have somebody in those buildings, they have to pass criteria for a purely charity, purely nonprofit entity. And there are a variety of questions that are, you know, in essence, a test case kind of question where you would evaluate whether or not that organization meets that criteria. If they do not, then yes, we would still be subject to tax on that
Would it
building.
be that we evaluate, or the assessor's office evaluates?
So we have to provide documentation to prove.
We have to prove it.
That's correct. So the way that the language appears to be written, and we've asked the solicitor to review that, so that has been sent to them for review to make sure that we fully understand. But the way that I read it is there's a series of 8 to 10 proof questions, and you would then provide documentation to show that each of those items is satisfied, and you would provide that to the assessor's office. That's my understanding.
And HANS, the
Or the
reason that
tax
Mahogany
office.
isn't even something we need to think about for this right now is that HANS meets that criteria, so we're not under the same assessment pressure that we are under for Bill City and Evans Falls.
Yes, although we need to go through that exercise, so this is data that we gathered within the last month. So as Christine has been working with the tax collector's office, that's information that she received. And so they've asked us to work with HANS to gather that information. So, you know, that we're in the process of doing that. That's really what triggered that conversation is really the status of all 3 buildings, but we quickly realized that was something that we would need to partner with the organizations that are utilizing Mahogany. On the surface, there's nothing that I see that is a showstopper, you know, for that. But obviously we'll go through that exercise, and they are aware that we've initiated that process. They being the tax office, they know that we're working to begin that process.
Do we
certainly think that each of those buildings would be over $100,000 each for their tax implications. And some of that data was in the appraisal information, and some of that we were able to get from some follow-up phone calls. So we certainly could get that on each of the buildings to see the exact numbers.
So it's, behooves us to proceed.
In my opinion, yes.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
I apologize that we didn't request some time on the floor prior to the meeting, but we would like to address this topic if we could.
Okay.
I'm Brian Traeger. We both live right behind Evans Falls School, and there's a pretty big chunk of wooded area between us and the school. And he's just kind of curious if the school will be interested in selling that property to us, subdividing.
That can certainly be taken under consideration by the Building and Grounds Committee as they go forward. Typically, when you sell anything, some sort of competitive bid type process is usually what's required, at least initially anyway. So we have to follow guidelines of disposal of property when you're selling it. Can't just pick somebody and say,
Right.
we like you guys, so we're gonna sell to you. That's not gonna fly very well.
Not scram.
That's right.
Bill,
Yes,
can I
Lord.
ask some questions?
Yeah.
Can you guys tell me, if I recall correctly, when I spent many years working at Evans Falls, are you talking about the back edge of the field and then the woods before it hits the dirt road
For history.
that goes to all of the houses?
Yeah.
It's that hunk of woods? Okay,
Our property line right at the edge of our driveway where
Right.
the telephone poles are.
right.
And which, we situated ourselves that way, intentionally figuring that the school district would always be there and it would be a buffer zone.
So it's basically just a chunk of trees?
Right.
Okay.
Technically, yeah.
Just didn't, okay.
You could right, sell the land and get the building to go.
Yes, you can use it for storage.
A nice buffer, right?
Be a nice bus garage.
There you go.
See?
Once you buy it, you decide what you wanna do with it.
So I think the right thing to do though is if there's a proposal, you guys need to send us in writing, here is exactly what we propose. Because,
They have sent a letter, just
Okay.
saying they were interested.
okay.
Do you have an estimate of, like, dimension-wise, how you would, at least at this point, recommend how it would be delineated? Is there a particular approximate acreage or, like, footage going, along the road?
Just the ballpark, yeah, we haven't really done that much research onto it yet. The tree line.
So, what
would be approximately-
might be, a good starting point is kind of an addendum to the letter that you received in terms of their inquiry. Perhaps like they could walk it with somebody like John or myself, Shapolsky, to just sort of get a better idea of kind of where we, to get an idea of how much we're talking about so that we would have a better understanding of how we would go about potentially drawing that line. I think it's probably too premature to do anything survey-wise, but I think, getting a better idea of like, is it an acre, is it 10, is it 20? I'm just, throwing out numbers, but I think that would be a good exercise.
You guys would know approximately how much it is.
If we stay within the lines of our own properties now, it would be approximately 2 acres
Okay.
between my house and the school line. 2 acres between his house and the school line.
So 4 acres?
4 acres, and then I'm not sure, the part we didn't talk about, my third brother is the next house down.
Oh, okay.
Whether, I'm not sure where that fits in the picture yet.
Okay. So if you guys,
I think I wanna buy his property too.
And that's what I wasn't sure about.
Right.
so if the board is entertaining this, then I guess to get, like Shane said, to walk it with John or with her or with somebody, and then also an approximation, put it in writing, approximately what we're talking about, before we would go and get the maps and everything.
That's right, because realistically, I'm on the Buildings and Grounds Committee, my thought process is that we advertise it as a full lot, but if it's land that's know, 6 acres that isn't meaningful to whoever might buy the building, then it's something we can, you know, a lot easier to entertain than that.
Thank you.
Okay, so, okay, we gotta check, see if there's any implication from a planning commission standpoint, writing it off and what's left.
Right, correct. But at least then we would know how much we're talking about.
Yeah. Okay, I'm thinking we should have a motion to direct the Buildings and Grounds Committee to, pursue avenues of.
Yes. So.
So make the motion.
Okay, a motion, do we have a second?
Second.
Any more discussion? Roll call.
Mr. Burke?
Yes.
Mrs. Arnold?
Yes.
Mrs. Bennett?
Yes.
Mrs. Gregory?
Yes.
Dr. Favola?
Yes.
Mr. Swilly?
Yes.
Mr. Widener?
Yes.
Mr. Farr?
Yes.
I'm not saying we should give this away, any of it, but I think we need to be pretty reasonable about the district and whoever would buy it is gonna be so much better off once this is done. So I don't wanna be unreasonable in what our expectations would be for sale. Just wanted to put that out there.
Any other?
I have one item, Mr. President.
Yes.
Only came to my attention when I came back from Florida, and I had a good time, thank you. Disney.
And we're jealous.
For about 10 years, we've had a teacher over what is now the Intermediate Center running a coffee cart. She's been using the funds she raises from that to take the special needs kids on field trips. I just heard that that's coming to a close because of administrative changes. Why?
So, what I can provide is perspective, and I think, I don't know that it had come to a stop. It was brought to my attention that there were concerns from a, student activity fund standpoint. So there are some particular criteria that we have to follow in terms of fiscal management for money that is brought in, as a student activity. And I don't know at this point, I need to do some follow-up to understand if they had established themselves as a student activity. So what it really is about is making sure that as that money is being brought in, that we have good controls about how that money is being utilized. And if it is a part of a student activity fund, it has to ensure that it benefits all of the individuals who are encompassed within that particular group. So that was originally flagged as a concern to ensure that that was happening. The individual that I spoke to had originally thought that when the coffee cart had started, that part of it was to build social skills and life skills with that group of students, and that the money they were raising was going back into the purchase of the supplies to continue that entity so that those activities could continue. And I think that what began to happen is that the funds that were raised were more than what they had, and they were utilizing it for the benefit of those groups. So more than anything, we just need to ensure that the money is flowing through the right systems if it is actually considered a student activity fund. So I can take that one as follow-up, Bill. I did not know that those items had specifically stopped, so there was discussion, but I can find out some more information.
Please do.
You bet.
I'd like to hear about it next board meeting.
You bet.